Hi, I want to talk about autism, ADHD and bereavement or grief. I am autistic and I have ADHD, and my experience of bereavement is unique to me due to a number of factors, a couple of which are my autism and my ADHD. So I'm going to talk about how I experience grief and bereavement and some of the things that have been an issue for me and how I have dealt with those issues, in particular in relation to my neurodivergent conditions. So one of the most obvious ways in which I think my experience differs is when it comes to processing emotions around grief. I have experienced the death of a lot of people that I love in my lifetime so far, so I feel like I have been through this experience enough times to feel like I understand now how I deal with it. But I know that the first time that I lost someone that I loved, it was an incredibly difficult experience that took me a really long time and a lot of therapy to process. And that is partly because I have a hard time recognizing and processing my emotions anyway. And when you're in the midst of a bereavement, your emotions are quite hard to recognize and process, even if you are not neurodivergent. And then in addition, I found that my experience of the emotions was delayed as compared to the people that were around me experiencing that grief. So I didn't actually experience the emotion of grief until long after all of the kind of fuss around death, the funeral and the family gatherings had already finished. I felt nothing. And I felt like I should be feeling something, and that made me feel like I was doing grief wrong. And then in addition, even when I did start feeling my emotions, they were not necessarily and obviously connected to the grief that I was experiencing. So I would be completely distraught at the fact that maybe I'd missed an appointment, or maybe a letter I'd been expecting had not been delivered, and all this emotion would come out. And it's only now that I know and understand my brain a little bit better that I can look at those moments and say, actually, that was me experiencing my grief, but being unable to connect it in a tangible way to what I had lost. It is hard having emotions about losing someone that you love without not actually having those emotions in direct correlation to the person that you love, and not actually being able to understand why or when those emotions will come out, which leads me on a little bit to kind of masking and bereavement. So as an autistic ADHDer, I do mask and have masked quite heavily at times, and I think that around the death of the people that I lost longer ago, prior to me learning about unmasking, I really masked quite extremely in a way that was kind of damaging to me. So in the first instance, I literally witnessed the death of a few people who were very, very close to me. I was with them when they died. And because of my masking, and in addition to my masking, the trauma response that I have because of a lifetime of trauma, because of my neurodivergent, which is to make sure that people around me are all completely comfortable and happy, because that is my main priority in life, that is my trauma response. I, in that moment, masked the shock that I was undoubtedly experiencing at having witnessed someone die, and instead was like, can I get anyone a drink? Can I da-da-da? And just went into full-on people-pleasing, masking. I'm agreeable, I'm nice, I can make sure everyone's okay right now. Rather than prioritizing my own feelings and processing my own feelings, I prioritized everybody else's feelings and making sure that everybody else was okay. And this cost me in terms of my mental health. And as I've said, I think the reason that I did that is because I had been conditioned to mask my autism and the way that I respond to things, and my ADHD and the kind of muchness that I have berated myself for about my ADHD, and how that might make other people annoyed with me. And the other side of that masking is kind of the like masking the emotional response that I think people want from me in that moment. So at the funeral and at the wake, watching other people around me experience emotions in a way that I felt was the right way to experience emotions, crying and hugging each other and how they experience their emotions. I didn't feel that. I didn't feel like crying, and I definitely did not feel like being touched. I just felt like something really strange had happened and I didn't know what to do about it. But because everyone around me was doing those things, I felt like I should do those things, or I would be perceived as being cold or heartless or whatever. Again, I would be judged as not enough. So I masked those emotions at the funeral, and then I was really confused because at the funeral the emotions that you mask are crying and clutching each other and those kinds of emotions, but then at the wake people seem to cheer up a little bit, and then they're like talking about the loved one in a happy way and the memories that they have of them. And I was a little bit thrown by this social shift. So we go from crying to drinking and eating and like almost like a party, and that was very confusing, and I had a bit of a hard time masking that, and so I didn't probably get it right, but I definitely noticed there was something that I should be doing that didn't make sense to me. Obviously there is like a lot of etiquette around grief and death, and things that you're supposed to say and things that you're not supposed to say and things that you're supposed to do. And that's really tricky for me because in the past I have gotten things wrong socially in like an etiquette kind of way. I'm now someone who's very aware that there are like expected actions that I should do in certain circumstances, and that if I don't do them, people will be cross at me. So I would recommend, if you're in this situation, Google search for what you're supposed to do in some cases when this specific person of this specific relationship to someone has died. And some of the things that you're supposed to say, like "I'm so sorry for your loss," feel very fake to me, and I'm not someone to whom using these fake ways of speaking comes very naturally. But if you're at a funeral or a wake and you are stood in front of someone where you're going to have to choose something to say, I think it can be helpful to know those standard phrases, like a kind of scripting, I guess, of the things that it might be useful to say in these situations, because then you can feel more confident that you're not going to get it wrong. Talking about the language around death, I think sometimes language used around death can be very woolly and confusing, like as I just mentioned, saying "I'm sorry for your loss" or "this person is gone." It's never straightforward, "this person has died." It's always a kind of way of saying it that, like, I guess softens the blow, but how can you soften that blow? Sometimes when I've been in a situation where I've been told that someone has died, first of all, it can be quite hard to work out that the person has died because I'm not being told "this person is dead, we lost them." Did you? Where are they? Should we go looking for them? Like I get confused by that. But then the other thing I find quite tricky, and perhaps I'm not supposed to think this, is that you don't get told very often how the person died, like certainly not straight away. And I'm sure that there are reasons for this, like the person telling you is in too much shock to get into that. But my first thought as an autistic person is, how did this happen? I need to understand how this has happened in order to start processing it. And there is no way to ask how specifically did they die without being considered being rude by neurotypical people. Also, the same kind of woolliness often happens around funeral arrangements. So I don't know what it's like in other countries, but certainly here in the UK, usually at the moment, the time between the person dying and the funeral is somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks. But it doesn't usually get announced that quickly when the funeral will be, because usually you have to wait for things like coroner's reports and certain arrangements to be made before you can actually book a funeral. So that can be quite tricky, because it means you're left knowing that I want to go to this person's funeral, but I don't know when it is, where it is, what the details are. And because of my autism, I like to know what's happening really far in advance and book out my calendar really far in advance. And that can be quite tricky, and then you might end up having to rearrange things last minute in your calendar because you've only just gotten the details of the funeral. And you also have to wear particular clothes. The worst case scenario for me is when someone has a special or fun funeral attire. Like, we're going to have brightly coloured clothes because this person wouldn't want us all to be sad and wearing black. Recently happened to me, and I took it very, very literally and wore very brightly coloured Lucy and Yak dungarees like a clown, and I turned up, and what they meant was not black. They didn't mean brightly coloured, but that's what I was told. And then it feels easier to get it wrong than when it's just wear black. Okay, I can follow that command. I would definitely recommend not wearing anything uncomfortable, because it is hard enough navigating all of this without also having sensory issues around the clothes on your body. All of this is a lot. You've got to deal with your life whilst grieving, whilst processing what's happened, whilst dealing with the social side and the funeral and such like. I know that for me, when an aspect of my life is not running smoothly, all of my neurodivergent stuff can be impacted. I can lose the ability to speak. I can lose the ability to regulate my emotions as effectively as I normally do. I might have more meltdowns. I might have more shutdowns. I might not be able to go to work for as long as I usually can. So I think it's important that you keep that in mind and practice the self-care strategies that work for you more often, and give yourself the space that you need to look after you so that you can cope with all of this. So I hope that this video has been useful. If you could like the video so that I know that I'm putting something out there that people want to watch, that would be really useful. I'm not going to ask you to subscribe because I'm kind of done with that. Subscribe if you want to. It would be great if you're part of the purple community, but I don't want people to feel under any pressure anymore. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.